Hi boys and girls. I have a book I'm going to share with you today called The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. And this book is based off of a place in Manhattan called the High Line that after I read the story I actually went and visited it with my family. It's a really beautiful place. And I'm going to send you a picture of the author's note at the end that tells you a little bit about it if you want to visit it someday with your family. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. Dreary means kind of sad and lonely and dark. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. It was on one such morning that Liam made many surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing that he expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. So he was learning. He wasn't perfect at it, but he tried and he was really putting in his best effort. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Boys and girls, this is moss. I brought you a little spot of it because I love to plant it in my garden, not only because I think it looks pretty, but because flowers actually grow through it. Sometimes they can't grow through the grass, but they can grow through the moss. So this is a little spot of moss that I brought so you could see what it looks like. Some people like it, some people don't. I do. Most gardens stay in one place, but this one was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. It wanted to start traveling. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants, the more gentle ones at the bottom. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. If you look, boys and girls, it's starting to travel all along this spot. Don't forget what it looked like in the beginning. And Liam looked pretty happy in his beautiful garden. He often looked out the side to see if maybe there were other spots or other places that maybe wanted a garden. And as he imagined, the snow came. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Sometimes gardeners get sad around this time of year because their flowers start to disappear. But there's other things to do, like sleigh riding. But rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. He got some supplies. He started reading up about gardening, something he found out that he enjoyed doing. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over the railway. So that blanket of snow started to melt, and it kept all those flowers warm over the winter. But thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, The plants awoke from their winter sleep. So winter had taken a little bit of a toll on his garden, but now, with a little help, his plants started growing. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden's even starting to travel down the brick wall. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. So look at this, boys and girls. Liam's little imagination, this broken down car that was once just rusty, is now having flowers grow through it. It's called yard art, and that car became yard art. Think about Mike Mulligan and Mary Ann, how Mary Ann was reused, just like this car was reused or repurposed. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. And Liam even surprised people around the neighborhood and left them plants or flowers. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardens. So all through the city, these rooftop gardens started to appear, all because the people in the apartments saw this curious garden starting to take place, and they thought, wow, that would look nice at my house. And this happens all over cities now, boys and girls. People even sit up on their rooftops. They picnic. Remember, cities don't have a lot of space on the ground, but on the rooftops is where people make their backyards. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed, but of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. The end. Hope you enjoyed this, boys and girls.